Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about something that's unfortunately still a really big issue, the Syrian humanitarian crisis. We've got this in-depth UN report called Syria Humanitarian Sitrep 23 November 2024, and let me tell you, it is full of info about what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, it's
So
dense.
what we're going to try to do is go through all of that and pull out the most important stuff for you guys.
What really stood out to me right away was this map they included in the report. It really highlights that this crisis isn't just about people leaving Syria.
Yeah, that map is pretty powerful.
Yeah, it shows that a huge 63% of the people who need help are still inside Syria, which really highlights this massive internal displacement that's been going on for over a decade.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that part.
Yeah.
We hear about the refugee crisis, but this internal displacement is huge.
Right.
So let's look at the numbers a little bit closer. The report says that something like 557,000 people are living in these informal settlements.
Yep.
Can you imagine those conditions? And then there's this number that really got me. It seems that only around 7,800 Syrian refugees have gone back home, according to the UNHCR.
Wow.
But then the IDP task force, which focuses on people who've been displaced inside Syria, puts that number closer to 21,000. Makes you wonder why there's such a big difference.
Well, it shows how hard it is to keep track of people moving around in a war zone. It's very volatile, to say the least.
Definitely. And that lack of reliable information probably makes it even harder to get help to the people who need it most. Which brings us to another big problem the report talks about. The challenges of getting aid where it needs to go.
It's easy to say just deliver aid, but then you read about all the logistical issues, the ongoing conflict, and the fact that the UN can only use one border crossing, the Jadek Yatbus crossing, to get aid into northwest Syria. It really shows just how tough it is.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
And then to top it all off, the report says that with winter coming up, they have to get supplies to northwest Syria before the roads get blocked. It's almost like a race against time.
It is. And there's a massive lack of funding, too. We're talking 81% funding gap for education and a crazy 97% gap for nutrition.
Wow, those are some seriously concerning figures. What does that 97% gap even mean for people who are struggling to survive?
It means that the programs that provide essential food and supplements to kids who are malnourished are severely underfunded. And sadly, this can have devastating long-term effects on their health and development. It's heartbreaking.
It really is a reminder of how important it is to make people aware of this situation. Maybe by bringing these issues to light, we can help close that gap. Now, the report also talks about how all of this affects children, which is probably the saddest part of this whole crisis.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
The picture the report paints is pretty bleak. It found that more than 47% of young children don't even have access to basic things like hygiene kits. And then there's that alarming statistic that only 47% of kids who need help understanding nutrition are actually getting it.
Those numbers are tough to hear.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, what's going to happen to that other 53% who aren't getting the help they might desperately need?
Yeah, it's a question that stays with me. It shows just how urgent it is that we do something. And it's not just their physical needs that are suffering. We have to consider the mental and emotional toll this is taking on the kids. The report points out that 17% of them are showing changes in their behavior, and 19% are showing signs of physical distress, probably because of the trauma they've been through.
It makes you wonder what kind of lasting impact all of this is going to have on an entire generation.
It does. And then you add in the fact that their education is constantly being disrupted.
Yeah.
So many of them are forced to move again and again because of fighting near their schools. It's just another hardship on top of everything else.
It's true. So what's being done to address this trauma? Are there any programs that are offering psychosocial support?
Yeah, thankfully there are. The report highlights the work that organizations like UNICEF are doing to provide psychosocial support to these children. They know that helping them cope with the trauma they've experienced is absolutely essential.
Well, that's at least a little bit of good news in the middle of all of this, right? At least someone is actively trying to help these kids process and cope.
It is a glimmer of hope. Because in the end, these aren't just statistics. We're talking about children with futures that are being shaped by this crisis.
Yeah.
And we have a responsibility to do everything we can to help them heal and thrive.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This is heavy stuff, but it's so important to talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, even with all the grim statistics, there are some positive things happening too. I think it's important that we highlight those as well.
Okay, I'm ready for some good news. What kind of positive things are we talking about?
Well, Annex A of the report actually outlines some of the successful programs and initiatives that are making a real difference. For example, thanks to the work of UNICEF and its partners, over 29,883 children and women were able to get health care.
That's great. So even with all these challenges, they're actually managing to reach a significant number of people with essential care.
That's right. And it's not just health care. The report also highlights the work being done in other areas like nutrition, education,
Huh.
water, and sanitation, the basic things everyone needs to survive and thrive.
So there is some light at the end of the tunnel. It's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. And I think that's really important to remember. Even when things seem incredibly difficult, there are dedicated people and organizations out there working tirelessly to make a difference. They are making a real impact on the lives of Syrian families.
It's a good reminder that even small victories can have a big impact.
They really can. And
Yeah.
it's our job to support these efforts in any way we can, because even though the situation is dire, there's always room for hope and progress.
All right. Well, that was a lot to take in, but it's really important information to have, and I'm glad we had the chance to go through it together.
Me too. And I hope our listeners are feeling more informed about how complex this crisis is and how important it is to continue to support the people of Syria.
I think they will. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive deeper into some of the initiatives that are working and explore some potential solutions for the future.
Sounds good. See you in a few.
Hmm.
It's easy to get caught up in the numbers and the scale of this whole Syrian humanitarian crisis.
Yeah.
But we can't forget that behind every single number, there's a real person, a family, whose life has been totally upended.
Yeah, it's true. And it's easy to get kind of numb to those numbers, especially when you're talking about a crisis that's been going on for so long.
Yeah,
We have to remember that these are real people with real families who are facing unimaginable hardships.
absolutely. And that's why the work that's being done in things like child protection is so inspiring. The report highlights some amazing initiatives that are focused on giving kids safe spaces, offering them psychosocial support, and working to bring families back together who've been separated.
That's incredible. Can you give us an example of what one of these programs might look like?
Sure, imagine a place in a displacement camp that's designed just for kids, a place where they can just be kids again. Play, learn, even if it's just for a little while. They have trained professionals there who offer counseling and support to help them work through their trauma. These spaces were so important for kids who have lost everything.
Wow, that's a powerful image. It's really amazing that these kinds of programs even exist.
They are. And they really show the resilience of the human spirit, both in the people who are providing these services and in the children who are benefiting from them.
We've talked a lot about the challenges, but it sounds like people are really trying to address them. What are some other possible solutions that the report talks about?
One thing it stresses is that we need more funding for humanitarian aid. Like we said earlier, the funding gaps are huge, and they're directly affecting the ability of organizations to provide essential help.
Right, those figures were really worrisome. But besides just throwing money at the problem, what else can we do?
That's a good question. The report actually calls for a more coordinated approach between international organizations, governments, and local communities. Everyone working together. It emphasizes how important it is to include Syrian people in making decisions that affect their lives.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, who understands what a community needs better than the people who live there?
Exactly. And the report also suggests looking into some new solutions like cash assistance programs that empower people to decide for themselves how best to meet their own needs.
Yeah, I've heard about those programs. It seems like they give people a sense of agency and dignity compared to just handing out supplies.
Right. That's the idea.
Yeah.
It lets people figure out what they need most and also helps the local economy. It's a way to encourage people to be self-sufficient instead of dependent.
I like that. So it sounds like there's a ton of work to be done, but there are also some promising ideas out there. But the big question is, how do we make sure these solutions actually happen?
Well, that's where advocacy comes in. The report really stresses how important it is to raise awareness about the crisis and push for political solutions that tackle the things that are causing the conflict in the first place.
So it's not just about providing aid, it's about addressing the bigger problems that are driving this whole crisis.
Exactly. And that requires a real effort from the entire international community. It's about holding those in power accountable and demanding a peaceful resolution to the conflict.
It's a complicated issue for sure, but it sounds like even small things can make a difference, like staying informed, supporting organizations working on the ground, and speaking out about the need for peace and justice.
You got it. Every voice matters. Every action, no matter how small, can contribute to a better future for the people of Syria. It's about acknowledging their resilience and supporting their right to a life with dignity and hope.
Well said. This has been a really eye-opening conversation, and I'm so grateful for your expertise and your insights. I'm sure our listeners are feeling more informed and maybe even inspired to do something.
I hope so, because at the end of the day, the Syrian people deserve our attention, our empathy, and our support.
Absolutely. They deserve our solidarity in their fight for a better future.
And, as we're talking about this, it's worth thinking about what this crisis means in the long term. Even if the fighting stopped tomorrow, the effects of the war are going to be felt in Syrian society for generations.
That's a serious thought. We tend to focus on the immediate needs, which is obviously important, but we also have to think about the long-term rebuilding and healing that's going to be necessary.
You're absolutely right. It's about rebuilding buildings,
Yeah.
yes, but also about rebuilding lives, communities, and a sense of hope for the future. That's a long-term commitment that's going to require a lot of sustained effort and resources.
So where do we even start to deal with something so complex and overwhelming? I think a lot of our listeners might be feeling a little lost right now. What would you tell them? What can they do to help?
Well, I think the first step is always knowledge. By taking the time to understand the Syrian humanitarian crisis, we're better prepared to engage with it in a meaningful way.
Yeah, that's true. This deep dive was really just a starting point. This is a complicated issue, and there's always more to learn.
Exactly. And once you have a better understanding, you can start thinking about how you want to get involved. Maybe do some research. Find some organizations that are doing work that speaks to you. And think about donating your time or some money.
That's great advice. And don't underestimate how important it is to simply stay informed and talk to other people about this crisis. Raising awareness is so important.
It really is. Every conversation, every bit of information you share can help keep this issue in the public eye.
And hopefully that will lead to more action, more support, and ultimately more hope for the people of Syria.
I think it will. The human spirit is unbelievably resilient, and there's always a reason to hope for a better future.
It's really striking how easy it is to feel lost when you look at the sheer scale of what's happening in Syria.
Yeah, it's true. The sheer number of people, the statistics,
Yeah.
the fact that the conflict is still going on,
Yeah.
it can be overwhelming.
Right. It can make you feel almost powerless. And I think that's why it's so important to remember the human side of all of this. Because at the end of the day, this is about people, families, and entire communities whose lives have been completely shattered.
Yeah, you're right. And I think one way to do that is to focus on the stories of resilience, the acts of courage, the little victories that are happening every single day, even in the middle of all the chaos.
I like that. It's about finding those glimmers of hope.
Hmm.
Those reminders that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit is still there.
Exactly. Because when we focus on those stories, it reminds us that change is possible, that even small things can make a difference.
So for those listening who are feeling overwhelmed, maybe even a little bit helpless, what would you say to them? What can they do to make a difference?
Well, first of all, I'd say don't underestimate the power of simply knowing about it. By taking the time to learn about this crisis, to have conversations like this, you're already making a difference.
That's a good point. Knowledge is power, as they say.
Exactly. Yeah. And once you have that knowledge, you can share it. Talk to your friends, your family, your coworkers, post about it online. The more people who know what's going on, the more pressure there will be to find solutions.
And for someone who wants to do more than just spread the word, what are some actual things they can do?
Oh, there are so many ways to get involved. You could donate to some of the organizations that are doing great work, providing aid in Syria. Maybe volunteer your time or skills. You could even write to your elected officials and urge them to support policies that promote peace and human rights.
So there really is something everyone can do, no matter how much time or money they have.
Exactly. Every little bit counts. And remember, even small actions can have a big impact.
That's such an important thing to remember. It's easy to feel like what we do doesn't really matter, but together we really can make a difference.
We absolutely can. And it's that collective action, that feeling of shared responsibility that's going to lead to a better future for the people of Syria.
Well said. Well, on that note of hope and collective action, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
Yeah, I think so. It's been a tough conversation, but an important one.
Definitely. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise and insights with us today.
My pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you've come away with a better understanding of the Syrian humanitarian crisis, and we hope you'll continue to learn, stay engaged, and take action in whatever way you can, because even though the challenges are huge, there's always hope, and together we can make a difference.